Hello and welcome. For the next half an hour, we peruse the top economic stories of the week. This is Policy Watch. But before I introduce my guest this week, here's a quick look at the headline. The GDP numbers for the first quarter of FY13 are out. A growth of 5.5% registers, down from the 8% registered in the first quarter of FY12. The Supreme Court gives telcos a breather. Deadline of fresh auction for 2G spectrum extended to January 11, 2013. CAG, all set to defend its report on coal allocation, will give a presentation to the Public Accounts Committee during the week. Finance Minister P. Chidambaram wants a fresh look at the direct taxes code, wants the indirect tax target of 5.05 lakh crores to be met this fiscal. And more trouble for the beleaguered Maharaja. Air India pilots to face up to a 70% cut in salaries. Those are the headlines. My guest this week is Shalini Singh, Deputy Editor at The Hindu. This is your first time on the show, Shalini. A very warm welcome to the show. We'll go straight into our top story, which has come out. Now, India's GDP in the first quarter of FY12-13 grew by 5.5% higher than the estimates of 5.2% and slightly better than 5.3% in the preceding quarter. However, analysts are still of the view that this better than anticipated GDP growth for the first quarter may not be enough for the RBI to cut interest rates. While agriculture grew at 2.9%, which is higher than expected, manufacturing saw tepid growth at 0.2% for the quarter under review. Shalini, will go into our lead story now, and that is, of course, the Supreme Court extending that deadline for 2G auctions. The Supreme Court has extended the deadline for the auction of 2G spectrum to January 11, 2013. The court had earlier ordered the government to conduct the auction by August end and had allowed affected companies to operate on their existing permits till September 7. We file a story, take a look. In response to a petition filed by the government to extend the deadline for 2G spectrum auction, the Supreme Court has extended the deadline for the auction to January 11, 2013. The court had earlier ordered the government to conduct the auction by August end. However, the Apex Court has issued a warning that it will initiate contempt proceedings if the centre failed to meet the new deadline. Telcos whose licenses were set to be revoked on September the 7th can now operate till January 18, 2013. Companies that want to participate in the upcoming spectrum auction will have to apply by October the 19th, which is the last date for applying. The first set of auctions will kickstart on November the 12th. In a related development, the Department of Telecommunications issued a memorandum on the auction of 2G spectrum, with Delhi being the most expensive at a reserve price of Rs 693.06 crore for 1.25 MHz. With Rahul Kapoor, Athar for RSTV. There you go. Shalini, you follow the sector closely. Did you sort of expect the deadline to be extended, given the fact that the government has did ask for an extension to November 12, citing so many reasons? They cited finding a suitable auctioneer as a reason, the whole non-clarity in fixing the reserve price as well, providing guidelines to existing players. Did you expect the deadline to go further like it has?
Well, actually, I've been writing right from the beginning that it looks like it will not make 2012 and it could be extended beyond December. Firstly, auction planning requires time. It's not something that necessarily should be done in a hurry. So to have successful auctions, you have to have a lot of things in place. You have to be able to give bidders a lot of clarity. And the government itself had no clarity on the issues, because what it did is it filed a presidential reference in the Supreme Court, actually, bringing in several telecom matters under dispute. And the presidential reference, if I can take you back, is basically the Supreme Court had cancelled these 122 licenses, and the auctions are for that returned, the cancelled spectrum. So the presidential reference asked questions like, what is the fate of all the licenses that were allocated since 1994? What happens to the spectrum? Does it come back? What should it be priced at? How should it be allocated, etc., etc.? So now, with so much uncertainty in the sector, with all the players, the MTNL, BSNL, Airtel, Reliance, I mean, all the top incumbents are now uncertain about the future of their spectrum, whether it will be cancelled or not, and the price of their existing spectrum.
Well, Shalini,
how do they plan their bidding strategy?
It's interesting you mentioned the presidential reference. We'll come to that in just a bit. But before that, I want to ask you this. The extension of that deadline doesn't really guarantee that it'll be a successful auction per se. Government seems to think that they will, in fact, get a really nice bidding process going. But the fact remains that the bidding only starts at a reserve price of 14,000 crore, a price that newer entrants and smaller telcos still find way too high for them to win back spectrum that they lost.
Oh, well, I think it's now fairly obvious that that is a fair value of spectrum, because the TRAI has revisited this price. As you remember, they recommended 18,000 crores and they revisited it 3 times at the DOT's behest. And they stuck to their figure. And then, of course, the industry was saying that, please, give us a breather. And then there was this slight discount. But I think it's fairly clear operators know that spectrum is valuable and precious, and they need to factor that in.
There's also this feeling, Shalini, that no single operator will bid for a pan-India license. Nobody's really interested. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, as I said, the pricing of the spectrum, for which the clarity will only come after the presidential reference. Hopefully that will also come in by September.
Right.
And that will give clarity. Otherwise, how do you plan your bid strategy? Because now the entire spectrum held by operators is now up for market value. So you don't know what your overall outlay is going to be. It's not a question of just a limited auction. It's pricing for all the spectrum you've held before, and also you need to plan for what you may require in the future.
So it's really difficult for telcos to plan out their business strategy as well.
There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of grief.
Right. Coming back to the presidential reference, Shalini, you rightly mentioned that the decisions will obviously be taken after the presidential reference comes in. Now, what is the sense that you get on those 2 issues? One, on the refarming, spectrum refarming issues, and issuing new license fees for incumbents. What do you think is likely to happen when the presidential reference comes in? What do you think, which way will that go?
Well, actually, the biggest question up in the air is the question of the upfront fee. And that is the one-time upfront fee. So that is the question which I think companies are very worried about, because that will be a huge outlay for them. And basically, once the presidential reference tells you which licenses are legally valid and which are not, and gives you some sense of the pricing, only then will the cabinet be able to take a view on what that upfront fee should be. Everything else will follow, I think, basically from that.
Right. Is there also a danger, Shalini, that some players, some really important players till now in the telecom sector in India might not participate at all? Like Etisalat has indicated, like Estel has indicated, even Loop has indicated they might just take an exit route. Do you think there's a danger of major players not even applying for spectrum, not even bidding?
But Etisalat and Loop are not major players, because they have done nothing to roll out operations. I mean, they didn't do anything. They basically just squatted on the spectrum.
But Loop is still in the game, isn't it?
Well, not in this. It's in the game, limited, but the spectrum that it got in 2008, it's not rolled out, it's not invested in infrastructure, nothing. And just by squatting on the spectrum, based on this cabinet decision of a 14,000 crore reserve price, from 1658 crore, now that spectrum is worth 12,350 crore odd rupees, without a rupee invested in infrastructure or branding or employees. So, this is what they gain, and consequently, as a result of cancellation, they're huge loss.
Right. One last question on this story, Shalini. The Counsel for the Public Interest Litigation, Prashant Bhushan, and I'm quoting him, he said the government was not interested in auctioning the licenses, and this was evident from the fact that it virtually challenged the 2G verdict through a presidential reference. Rather strong words used there, or do you think he's hit the nail bang on the head?
He said that I didn't get
the government is not interested in auctioning at all, and because they asked for a presidential reference.
No, actually, I think we all found the presidential reference a little ludicrous, because there was clarity that the judgment for license cancellation is restricted to the 122 licenses that were fraudulently, illegally and arbitrarily awarded in 2008 by the then telecom minister, Mr. Raja. So by filing this presidential reference and saying, please tell us about the legality for all the licenses awarded since 1994, people who were not in this cloud of uncertainty have been brought into this, depressing situation.
Right.
So we were wondering why the government wanted to do that in the first place. But certainly it cannot wriggle out of the auction.
Right.
Because the Supreme Court has said that they will initiate contempt proceedings if they violate this deadline.
So the ball firmly in the government's court right now.
Yes, absolutely. There's no way out of this.
Right. On that note, Shalini, we'll take a small break. We'll come back with the second story that we have for you on Policy Watch. More with Shalini Singh after this break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're still watching Policy Watch. Now, the CAG is likely to make a strong pitch for scrapping all the controversial allocations of coal mines during its presentation to the Parliament's Public Accounts Committee. In its presentation to the PAC, the CAG is planning to show how the eligibility of applicants was not thoroughly examined. A test check on companies which got mines showed there was little to distinguish these from those who failed to pass muster with the screening committee. The CAG's bold plan to defend its report comes in the wake of stringent attacks from the Congress party. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has rejected the CAG's findings, suggesting that it had erred in estimating gains for private players. The PAC meeting is all set to be a tumultuous affair and is sure to add to the government's woes in the monsoon session. Now, Shalini, the CAG report was slammed by the Prime Minister on the floor of the House. He said the findings were clearly disputable. He disputed the figure, the presumptive loss figure of 1.86 lakh crore as well with the CAG. Now, with the CAG and the Prime Minister locking horns now, who are we supposed to believe is right?
Well, I think the first thing to see is that when the draft report was leaked, the initial figure was 10.67 lakh crores. And then it created a furor. And then when the final report came down, although in between all of us journalists were in the know of the fact that the CAG is probably likely to stick to that original figure. So even though they did their evaluation and they found a huge loss, they decide to leave out several parts of the picture and leave out several calculations and just stick to a very basic calculation of 1.86 lakh crore. So I think in the aftermath of the 2G scam, the CAG must have been very well aware of the implications of this report politically. And I don't think it's easy for anyone to fight the establishment, the political establishment, big business. This is an entrenched system. So why would one stick one's neck out knowing that it's a losing game? It's a zero-sum game for those who oppose the system. So I think...
Well, I think you already answered my question there, didn't you?
Why would you do it if you were not certain?
Right, absolutely. Also, the CAG is set to defend, like I said before, in front of the PAC, the Public Accounts Committee. That's going to be interesting as well. They plan to show how they came to their conclusions. We shouldn't we not expect the PAC meeting, or should I say the PAC briefing afterwards, to be peppered with accusations, snarky comments and attacks on the government? Should we be prepared for that?
You see, Athar, my point is that if we just accept that let's just do things and use auctions. Like, for instance, today there's a story which says that the government, stung by these accusations, that was in one of the financial dailies, I think, has decided to auction steel. So, when they want to, they auction spectrum. They did it for 3G. Now they're doing it for the same 2G spectrum, which they refused to do earlier. So I think, these are just pointers to correct the system. Counter allegations and, denial is basically, it's just a political game. Right. But if you're interested in having the country progress, and technically, if you have the national interest at our heart, why would you not want that? So basically the matter, if you just break it down, is as simple as that. Let's just go in for transparent bidding.
Right.
Let's go in for fair play. Absolutely. Let's not have decisions behind, in an opaque manner where there is discretionary power used and exercised.
Fair point, Shalini. I'll go back to a basic question that people have been asking for a while now, not just within the government, also outside the government, civil society, what have you. The thought is, the school of thought that says that the CAG keeps overstepping its mandate, keeps overstepping the line. In this particular case, in Colgate, so to say, do you think the CAG is overstepping its mandate?
Well, I think it's the CAG's mandate to audit government expenditure and receipts and to make sure that there is transparency and that eventually that revenues are realized, because that is what is used for public expenditure and social good.
Right.
So I don't understand how it's overstepped its mandate. The only accusation is, in both cases, 2G and Colgate, is that the government has said that this is a policy decision and neither the courts nor anyone else should interfere in policy. But my question is that, the decision to open up a sector and to attract domestic or foreign direct investment is a policy decision. How you go about it is an administrative decision. And the method of allocation is open to Supreme Court scrutiny
Right.
and the auditor scrutiny.
Right.
So I don't think they're overstepping their brief, because they're not commenting on policy. They're just saying that it was opaque and arbitrary and caused a huge loss to the exchequer.
Right. I also
and corresponding gain to private parties.
Right.
Which is the clincher.
I have a question for you. Didn't the NDA, when they were in power, the PM in his explanation has said that the current system, the ongoing status quo, was really bad for the country. Why? Because there were lower revenues, there were lower energy generation, and if he hadn't stepped in and given out these things, it would have never improved. The opposition says, and this is what the BJP is saying, especially the top leaders like Sushma Swaraj is saying, that we don't buy that argument. Revenues were lower in any case, GDP growth was going down anyway, lower energy generation was the norm of the day. Forget the opposition. Do you buy the PM's argument?
Actually, no, because the same argument was used in 2G, and even in the matter of coal, we had the two northern grid breakdowns recently. So if cheap coal translated into cheap and good power and more power, then why would we have had this situation? Also, this affordability and penetration of telecom services argument was used by Mr. Raja. But we found that the sector did not grow that much. And now the TRAI, at that time it was 1658 crores, a 2001 price that he chose for allocation in 2008. And now for the same spectrum, in an environment where there is less demand and financial turmoil, the same regulator had set the reserve price as 18,000 crores. The cabinet has set it at 14,000 crore. And guess what, Athar? Price impact is negligible, and they've held on to that. So price impact is negligible today. So how was it relevant then? But they have not stopped arguing, despite all this, that 2008 was fine. Whatever happened, it was just, they were following the existing system. And like in Colgate, they blamed the BJP for it. So I'm not going to argue a case for the BJP.
Yeah, you're not convinced.
All I'm saying is, if someone else did something wrong, is that any excuse for me to do something wrong?
No, it's not. Fair point. We'll take another short break, Shalini. We'll come back with a third segment on Policy Watch. Don't go anywhere. Policy Watch returns after this small break. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Now, P. Chidambaram, the original architect of the Direct Taxes Code, wants his tax officials to take a fresh look at the DTC bill and incorporate some new provisions to make it more effective. Policy Watch caught up with Pinaki Chakrabarty of the NIPFP to get his views on the issue. Here's what he thinks.
The Direct Tax Code bill has been stuck in limbo for a while. And to talk more on this, I have with me Dr. Pinaki Chakrabarty, Professor NIPFP. Welcome to Policy Watch, sir. So, Mr. Chidambaram, in a meeting with top CBEC officials, have said that DTC needs to have a fresh look. Would you agree? And what, in your opinion, is missing from the current draft?
I think the basic idea of DTC was to simplify the tax structure, remove much of the exemptions that already exist, and and remove the complicated direct tax laws that is in operation since 1961. I think the first draft had much of this in a very big way, which was probably little diluted in the next draft, and probably that is the reason why he is interested in reviewing the whole direct tax code again, and that is the idea that probably calls for a review in the direct tax code now.
Mr. Chidambaram originally brought DTC in 2008. However, not much has been done on it after that. Do you think that he is the one who initiated it, so he is back now? Do you think it will touch the finish line this time around?
Well, I don't want to guess, but I think DTC is going to be implemented. 2008 he brought it through, but then he was shifted to Home Ministry, and then DTC's another version came, the history and then it was supposed to be introduced in 2012. Now, if there is a review, I'm not too sure whether it can be introduced by the end of February, because you need a consultation process to go on, but he works very fast, so one really doesn't know. So it may so happen that you have the DTC very soon.
For the benefit of our viewers, if you could explain us how important is the DTC and how is the country losing by not having it implemented?
Well, it is very difficult to say how much the country is losing because it has not been implemented. Because if we look at our direct tax structure and direct tax revenue, it has been growing at a very good rate in the last 20 years after we have introduced reforms. So our direct tax to GDP ratio, which was very low, has gone up very significantly after we have reduced the rates of taxes from a very high level to a moderate level of 30%. So and a lot of simplification without DTC also has happened in the direct tax code. And information technology and tax administration has become much more modern than it used to be. You have PAN, you can file your return online and things like that. Once the DTC is introduced, which is a much more simplified tax system, which also removes a lot of cobweb of conditionality-driven exemptions, I think you will have a much more simple tax structure, which is very easy to administer and implement.
Mr. Chidambaram has asked CBEC officers to focus on top 100 taxpayers in order to achieve the indirect tax collection target of over rupees 5 lakh crore. Your thoughts on this?
Well, whether at the central level or as well as the state level, if we look at the major taxpayers and the tax structure, you will say only very few large payers pay bulk of the taxes. For example, at the state level, you will find say 20 very big dealers pay 90% of the sales tax. So probably that is the reason why, even in the case of central taxes, if you target the big fellows who contribute significantly to the central revenues, I think that would be very that would help in mobilization of revenue. But I don't think Chidambaram's idea is that you harp on them or you target them. But basic idea is to focus on an efficient tax collection by focusing energy on the bigger taxpayers rather than spreading the small tax administration thinned out to very few taxpayers, very large taxpayers.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to Policy Watch.
Rahul Kapoor there, talking to Pinaki Chakrabarty. Thank you so much, Shalini Singh, for joining us on Policy Watch this week.
Thank you.
We hope you come back many, many more times as well. Our first story this week on Policy Watch were the GDP numbers. The first quarter of FY13 are out. A growth of 5.5 has been registered. It's way down from the 8% we achieved in FY12, and analysts suggest that an interest rate cut by the RBI is not really going to happen. Our second story this week on Policy Watch was the Supreme Court giving telcos a breather. The deadline of fresh auctions for 2G spectrum has been extended to January 11, 2013. We'll have to see what the presidential reference, like Shalini said, when that comes out, the picture will become slightly more clearer. Our third story on Policy Watch this week is what we expect to be a tumultuous session when the PAC meets the CAG and the CAG defends its report on coal allocation. That is something to look forward to next week. That's all the time we have on Policy Watch this week. Athar saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.